Hello and welcome to the first episode of A Case for Black Metal's Greatest Album. Joining me today is Tempestuous Might from the Tempestuous Might YouTube channel.
Yeah.
David, who writes for Hessian Firm, and Malus from Apokatastasis. So today we're going to be talking about Emperor's debut album in the Nightside Eclipse. So let's start with a bit of a background into it. So David, what can you tell us about the demos that came before?
Mainly there's Wrath of the Tyrant, which had several songs that appeared later on the first full length, and I think the most salient observation is that it didn't have any keyboards, and they had a different drummer. These two things make it makes it feel very, very different. They're the same. Some of the compositions are the same, but the approach to the drums is much more simple. And because we don't have keyboards, then there's a lot more emphasis when you listen to it on the guitar riff, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, it was Samot who was actually on drums on this one, and Mortis, the Goblin, on bass. Which is quite funny. It's like a very completely different lineup, and there's I feel that the stylistic connection between their later stuff is very weak here. There's a lot more of a Bathory influence that's a lot more prevalent here.
I would say the leap from the demo to the EP to the album is very monumental, and you see every step of their evolution. In the first demo, you have Empire's Doom, and that's the same song as Night of the Graveless Souls, I believe. Let me see.
Yeah,
no, Beyond the Great Vast Forest.
Yeah.
It's the same song, but it's very much reworked on the final product. And in '94, they'd finally upped their complexity, and they had so many layers as compared to the first demo, where it's very raw, very primal.
Yeah,
and they actually finished the song. That song stands out very much in that album because it's probably the weakest there, but it's the only song that exists from their first demo. And then they have 2 songs from their EP that appeared. So only 3 songs from the past appeared on this full-length album. They do have some rehearsals with some of the other songs, though.
Yeah, I think that's the huge difference, where, throughout the rest of their career, there's a certain, emphasis on polyphony, the relationship between the guitars and the synths, Ishan and Samot doing their own things. Here, it's just like, they have one simple idea and they just need to smash it into your head.
Yes. In their own words, they said that demo was them in true black metal mode. I was reading up on some interviews with them yesterday.
Yeah. There's also a
what did
lot...
they say? What else?
They described In the Nightside Eclipse as them becoming art in a way, and they described the first demo as, they called it true black metal in the Dark Throne fashion.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because the first demo doesn't feature as much tremolo picking as what would come after. It's still very much within that 1.5 wave, where we're not in the first wave black metal, but we're not quite at the second wave black metal. Somewhat reminiscent of A Blaze in the Northern Sky by Darkthrone.
Yeah, Blaze has lots of references to 80s metal. Of course, that's all of Darkthrone, but it's not quite Transylvanian Hunger yet, correct?
Yeah. So I think that added...
Which is subsumed by this new dark technique, and it leaves most rock influences behind.
Yeah, exactly. I honestly, the Wrath of the Tyrant demo, still, you can tell that the guys were still listening to some of the more rockish heavy metal bands from the early 80s.
Definitely.
Yeah. But, it's insane when you think of that. The entire evolution happened in 2 years. That entire transformation, like, it's a monumental difference, like you said earlier.
You know why I think it happens? It's because even though I think it happens that fast, because even though the influences are, as you said, audibly still in the first, in the Wrath of the Tyrant, the attitude is very different. So you can recognize it perhaps, but it's a complete different context. It still sounds really brutal, I mean, or dark or whatever, true, right?
It's insane, but then let's move on to the full length. What are your initial impressions about it?
I think I can start, and then Jack and Timotheus can give their opinions too. I think that the whole symphonic black metal thing is overplayed. People think too much about the keyboards. They're not the biggest component in this album. They're not at all. They're very salient, and they market, but they're not even the basis of the album at all. And in many sections, they don't even figure. They don't have a. They only come in two keys at the very end of the whole section. So that's my first impression.
I would say in some places they exist as mere decoration.
And yeah, to add on, I think that when I was like listening to this and just like trying to analyze it a bit deeper, I noticed that a lot of the synth stuff is not really complex at all. It's just outlining like the basic chord progressions of the guitar, while the guitar is actually doing like all like the noodly like melodic stuff. They're just holding out like a couple of chords, just outlining the actual progression of it.
Most of the time,
so I'd say that it's very guitar based still. All the synths are more like, as you said, an aesthetic.
They're playing root notes of the harmony most of the time, and they're just accentuating certain parts of it to make them stand out.
There are a few sections where they do a little bit more, right? But they're just very select parts.
Especially Cosmic Keys, where they have that very epic 6-note ascending melody with the keyboards.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It's one of the rare parts on the album where the keys really seem to like indicate like a different shift in movement than the actual guitars.
There's like that one part, it's sort of like Baroque sounding, and like the keys are like shifting everywhere. It's like really fast. That's like the one part I remember where the melody like is completely taken over by the keys, if you know the section I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know exactly. But I want to give a somewhat controversial opinion here. A lot of people blame Burzum for being the kind of progenitor of shitty black metal sound, which I believe is completely false, because it's a fantastic sounding album. But the original issue of this sounds absolutely terrible. Like, I honestly believe that a lot of the kind of I would say the leeway that we give to black metal production, subconsciously, is due to this to many of the kind of shortcomings of this album production wise.
It has the same producer as Burzum.
Yeah, but it's weird. It sounds different.
I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. Python.
But one thing, because on the rhythm guitar is very weak and subdued compared to the synths, which is why I think the symphonic misnomer comes from, is the fact that the synths are so loud, so your ears will naturally gravitate towards the loudest as being the most dominant instrument or the most important one.
Remember, I mentioned that I think the sound of this album is saccharine. It has too sugary at the end, and I think that's why, because the synths are on top of everything.
Yeah. So I was looking up some of the some of the interviews. A lot of it is very contrasting, but from what I've managed to find out is that Ishan and Samoth were recording on very different pieces of equipment. Ishan had like actual death metal gear, whereas Samoth was going through like a practice amp or something, and you have this kind of like complete lack of balance in the rhythm guitars.
Did it come out really bad though? You think it's like crippled because of that?
Yeah, definitely. Because there's the 20th century no, not 20th century, 20th anniversary edition, which actually makes the album sound a lot better, and is in many ways the way the album should have been released. Because the rhythm guitars now are much louder. the synths as taken back to their to a much more natural role compared to what they do musically. But unfortunately, with this kind of remaster, is that the lead guitar isn't as prevalent as it should be, because Ishan does some very interesting things, lead guitar wise, on this album.
And this album is a bit of a precursor to bands using synth that just completely overpowers the guitar.
Yeah.
Summoning, for example, later Summoning, I would say. Their synth
Yeah.
is very much more an integral part of their entire sound than the guitar is, and as such, in the production, it completely overpowers everything in some of their later albums.
I mean, isn't that kind of their whole sound past like the first album, to be honest?
Yeah, I think
Starting with
probably
Malus
past the
Morgul.
second, because the second still has a lot of tremolo riffs that are very much in the forefront.
Yeah.
The third, it's more evenly mixed, I would say, and then after that, the synths are very, very dominant.
Yeah. So I think in many ways, unfortunately, this album did, because of the poor production, did inspire a lot of synth heavy stuff. Even now where you have a lot of these symphonic bands where it's just kind of very simple chugging riffs over kind of like pseudo cinematic synths nowadays.
Terrible.
Yeah.
Yes,
Reminds me of the early 2000s, honestly.
Yeah.
I've not really listened to that much stuff. So to me, like the production isn't as offensive. Like I can understand your complaints, but like it doesn't really remind me of any of like the bands that inspired, because I never really checked them out.
Because I
I
think
would say that black metal experienced the waves of classical music, but in a very condensed fashion. So the Baroque period would be the first wave. The classical period would be the early Burzum, Mayhem, Dark Throne. And then Emperor brought us into Romantic period.
Speaking like spiritual, like spirit wise, I suppose.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Yeah.
And black metal experienced this in a couple of decades, whereas for classical music, it was over 200 years. And so the Romantic period would be the bands that are ascribing to this majestic style, creating panoramas and soundscapes. So you have Summoning, Abigor, Odium,
Burzum.
Obtained Enslavement,
Yeah, I was thinking
bands such as that, Dies Irae,
Mm.
Parnassus, these sort of
and
bands.
then that modernism in death and black metal arrives with the end of the century, at the end of the century, right?
Yes.
When you have
Yes.
Abigor doing those weird, nonsensical, noise-based, not noise, I don't know what it is.
Modernist,
industrial.
Deathspell Omega.
Like industrial, super sped up industrial,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
I don't think it's necessarily bad, but it's
It's different. It's not necessarily bad nor good. Really.
Yeah. I agree.
All right, let's talk a bit more. Let's get into the kind of heart of the topic. Let's go into the composition. So, first of all, what are your impressions on the songs individually as a whole, without delving into the individual parts?
One by one. That's what all of them. I think they follow a certain pattern. They tend to open songs with a certain method. They bounce between two, usually, not all the time, between two, and like an A B A B A B. They make some variety. They make some variation, but they mix it up a lot, even when they're doing A, B, and C at the beginning of songs. And some of the songs return to the first idea at the end, like a rondo, that's a whole. And some of them just go straight through to like Cosmic Keys to My Creation in Times, for instance. It has an intro section, then it has a very long development in the middle. And at the end, it never returns to previous ideas. And I like it because of that a lot.
Yes, definitely. Was it I Am the Black Wizards is quite cheeky with that, because it recapitulates the kind of first part, but instead of tremolo picking it, they do it at a slower tempo, and it's just very arpeggiated at this point.
I think there's a lot of techniques that they kind of like use throughout like the whole like album to kind of make their own sound. There's a lot of like key changes like within phrases, whether it be like internal within the phrase, or like, you know, let's say A is in E minor, and B is in like B minor. There's like a lot of like switching around of those you know, keys, and usually it'd be like a very, very typical sort of sound. You like, you know, oh yeah, E to B, you know, first to fifth, but they do it in such like rapid succession that it seems more of like a sort of like flurry than like just a very typical, like, you know, baby's first chord progression sort of song.
Yeah, definitely, and I also do think, you know, the synths are very good at like giving, you know, a kind of you know, a direction to follow with these songs, because the guitars are, you know, they're constantly moving all over the place. You know, the riffs, there isn't really much room for, you know, breathing. You know, there's a certain intensity throughout this album, tempo wise and emotionally, that never really lets up, and it can get a bit you know, not suffocating or overbearing, but sometimes it can be kind of hard to follow, considering that a lot of these riffs are just like, you know, rapid flurries of notes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another interesting technique. I mean, this album is like usually consonant, but they'll have this like these breakdown parts that are like very, very like simple like chromatics. One progression that they love to do, they love to play like the root, then the major seventh, then the minor second. A sort of like that sort of progression where it's like it's used a lot in like classical music, or instead of they're kind of just avoiding the root note, but it still sounds like it's in key still, and it gives it this sort of they're usually used during breakdowns. It's sort of, it breaks up the consonants in like a very like I think it's a good way to break up the consonants, because it doesn't like, it's not completely random, but it still like has some like tension to it that you wouldn't find in your like typical, you know, symphonic black metal, which usually just remains diatonic.
Yeah,
I'm glad you brought this up, and you also brought the key changes within sections and within riffs sometimes. And other bands do that. You know who does that a lot? Abysm from Guatemala, and I think they picked it up from Emperor. This like you change the key you're using mid riff. You do a phrase with your riff, and then to finish the riff, you actually slide over chromatically and attach another phrase that is in a completely different key, and it gives it this kind of weird color contour inside the riff. Yeah, and so I'm glad you brought it up. Mm-hmm.
Because Abyssum are definitely part of that romantic wave. 98, I would say it's from 94 to 98.
Yeah.
98, yeah.
Yeah. And one last technique that I picked up upon, it's kind of, I'm gonna build off what Nick said with what you mentioned about I Am the Black Wizards, how they like, you know, recapitulate that intro riff at the end, but like, you know, they slow it down. They do that in other songs. With I Am the Black Wizards, it's a bit more explicit because it's literally following the same exact like melody. I don't see really any change within the melody itself, besides that it's like slower, but that doesn't change any of the notes.
It's just slowed, yeah. It's the exact same.
But
I don't know if
there's some other
I was
some other
playing it
parts
on
of the
keyboard
songs.
the other day. It's the same.
There's some other parts of the songs where it's like, instead of just copying like the same melody from previous section but slowing it down later, it'll be way more implicit. Like, let's say they'll do the same chord progression but change a bit of the notes to add like a different sort of vibe.
Yeah, you know, and I think what that does is that it, from these kind of limited you know, pool of ideas, they're able to get a lot of contrasts, a lot of things going on. You know, it's like you feel that there's a lot more going on because of how well, you know, composed everything is within its place. You know, once again with I Am the Black Wizards, you have that very weird breakdown that then leads perfectly into that, you know, arpeggiated riff, which is essentially the intro. But it's just that contrast between them and the way it just leads perfectly. You know, even some of kind of Ishan's, you know, vocal theatrics, you know, that he does throughout the entire album, it just fits perfectly, and you really get the impression like, wow, this is really the summit, you know. And then you've got the spoken word parts and all these kind of little ornamentations and everything just enriches the entire experience.
I like that you say that they're able to get all of these ideas from this small pool, right?
Yeah.
And that's actually what gives it power to the fact that it's very recognizable parts.
You know,
have you guys listened to like Dark and Shade, for instance, or all these bands that are like advanced satanic black metal, or Nightbringer, for instance? You can't remember. You can listen to their album 10 times and you can't remember anything that happened in the album.
Nightbringer's very random.
Yeah.
Very much so. It's like a carnival of notes.
There's no theme, and even if there's a theme, because Abigor has themes, late Abigor, and I still can't remember their songs after I've listened to them. So,
you know, it seems they regressed every album, I would say.
Yeah.
Nocthyman makes more sense, even if you don't always remember what's going on. You at least have melody to grasp onto, and they try to create.
Dark Age, that's the only one I can remember.
Yes. And Nocthyman takes direct influence from this album as well, even down to the cover. Really, it's very.
But you know, in the Nightside Eclipse, the themes and are so strong that even when I wasn't really familiar with the album and I had only listened to it a few times, like 1 or 2 times, I could remember the rhythm of the riffs.
Just about every song is one main theme that stands out as one melody.
Exactly, and that's very important.
Well, I'm going to put on the breakdown to the recapitulation of Emperor's I Am the Black Wizards.
So I know Asatana actually has counterpoint in it, and I want to say they got this from Morbid Angel because according to Ishin, they didn't really have any formal musical education. And in Ultras of Madness, there's actually 2 riffs which are counterpointed. They follow a similar path. Emperor actually uses one notation from that. One melody is played in the same way. One part of that melody, I should say. One melodic line is played in the same way as Morbid Angel did on Altars.
So yeah, that would be really the intro, like from the first second of the song, where literally both guitars are like doing something completely different. Where you know, Samot is kind of doing his like triplet tremolo picked riff, which is very Morbid Angel-esque, you know what I mean? Especially on stuff like Covenant, you know, like maybe the intro of like Rapture, for example. He's doing that kind of riff, which has quite a bit of dissonance in it. You know, you can tell that they're obviously very inspired by Morbid Angel there, but you know, with
I think
their
it's
melodic
Visions
twist.
from the Dark Side and the first track, Immortal Rights, I think both have this.
Definitely. And then, you know, Ishan on the other hand is doing something like this kind of crazy run in like triplets where he's alternating them with you know, major kind of like major third triads, and then there's some few crazy runs where he's going all over the place, which is done in a really interesting way.
To me personally, I see it less. I don't know if I call it like polyphonic per se, but it's more that they're switching positions, because instead of having like two separate melodic lines like within both of these guitars, one will act as just like outlining the chord progression while one plays the melody, but they switch off in between places, because sometimes like the left will play the chords, right will play the melody, then right will play the chords, and left play the melody.
Yeah.
The only time they really the only time they really like become like sort of their own, both are sort of like have like both are playing like sort of a melody, is like at the tail end of the riff. But that, like, you know, the little part.
Yeah, that's the very end, and they're playing the same. That's where they fuse. Actually, they're not playing separately. At the end, they play the same thing.
Oh yes,
I mean,
yeah, it's like more of a harmony than like a separate melodic line that like
They end,
at the beginning.
They end doing the harmony.
Yeah.
Something like this.
Yeah,
they harmonize.
And I think it makes the riff so much better to end it like that. They do this crazy thing and then they close it. It's really cool.
Yeah, this is another riff where I think what was I gonna say? Where they switch keys within the riff. They go from like, you know, sort of implicit like E minor type thing, and they go to like B harmonic minor and like the latter half of the riff, and it's kind of like doing this triad like ascent where it goes like, and then back to the tail, which, you know, goes back to the start of the phrase.
The thing is that you can feel it, right? I mean, those key changes are done because it's you can really feel the changing coloring there. It has like it pushes the character. That's what I should say. It gives it character.
You know, it's very good, you know, because a lot of these changes, while that in some ways they're complex, you know, and what have you, but they're very intuitive. You know, there is no need. It's not like Gorguts is Obscura where it needs to kind of you know, defy all expectations. You know, here you can actually feel the changes. They feel natural. They feel right. And I think emotionally, you know, they give that kind of sense of you know, mysticism that a lot of those you know, the progenitor Norwegian bands were looking for.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah.
Even in power.
Because the I mean, you can feel it from the album even before you read the lyrics at all. But maybe this is for the worldview section of our analysis. I will leave it for them. But it's extremely mystical, extremely, and really cool. I mean. First time I read the lyrics was today. I had never read the lyrics for this album. Yeah, but everything they're saying, you can feel it from the music. I mean, it's not going off in tangents or anything. It's an album. I mean, the titles give you the whole the theme, Into the Infinity of Thoughts, the burning shadows of silence, cosmic keys to my creation and times. And the fact that they have these weird titles that don't make sense grammatically makes it even it keeps it in your head. Cosmic keys to my creations. I am the Black Wizard. It's so weird.
But
Like,
this was actually intentional.
Yeah,
He's using the plural intentionally. It's not bad English, which I thought for the longest time. Then I actually read an interview with Mortis, because Mortis wrote the lyrics to tracks 4 and I'm the Black Wizards. He wrote the lyrics to Cosmic Keys as well. And he meant that. He meant that plurally. As in he is multi-dimensional.
I thought about it later as it was with people who practice like dream walking and dream interpretation, and you have this sort of things where you identify with several objects, several symbolic characters or something. So yeah, I thought it was.
It's an insane image, because on that, the Black Wizards song is obviously the most popular song from this album, and it's arguably the best song and what have you, whatever you want, but it's that imagery which is insane, and that the narrator's kind of like saying that all these multiple different wizards are him, like his soul is them, and you do find a lot of that kind of imagery within kind of a lot of Gnostic traditions, Neoplatonist traditions, where you have this kind of like one singularity, like one conscious, one knowledge of everything, what generally they call it the nous in the Neoplatonic systems, which just emanates into all things without being all things at the same time.
He says something like, there are many demons here and some are unknown even to me.
The lyrics. So this is Mortis who wrote the lyrics, or?
Yes, Mortis wrote the lyrics to Cosmic Keys and I Am the Black Wizards. The rest was mostly Ishin, I want to say.
There's a mighty as am I, but I am not alone in this cosmos of mine, for the Black Hills consist of black souls, soul that already dies, 1,000 deaths. Behind the stone walls of centuries, they breed their black art, boiling their spells in cauldrons of black gold. Summon the souls of macrocosm. No age will escape my wrath. I travel through time and I return to the future. You see? Yeah, yes. This is very cosmic and very beyond time and space kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the vocabulary overall of what they're using, so you have certain words like cosmic that come to mind, but then also a lot of geographical terms, lakes, mountains,
the mountains of Norway.
Yeah, Norway, exactly.
Very nationalist there.
Yeah, and then that, and then there's obviously a lot of words of like happiness, despair, sorrow. So you have all these.
That's what makes it strong, right?
Yeah.
If you look at the cover art, they express a lot of the things in the cover art in their lyrics.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like they're detailing specific parts of it. Because there's so much, there's a lot going on in this cover art.
It's very dense.
It's really very fitting for the album that
it's a very
you can sectionalize it, but as a whole, and its gestalt, there's a wide array of things happening at once.
It might not be high poetry, but I mean, emotionally, it's incredibly descriptive, and it's you can feel the music. The music itself feels extremely passionate with all of these albums, but the lyrics also by themselves, you can tell.
Yeah, what do you
very
think?
Faustian, very demonstrative too.
What do you think would be the kind of outside of metal, if there was a certain sister piece of art to it, whether it be a movie, a book, a painting, whatever, what do you think would you associate this with?
Perhaps Bruckner in some way, some of his later symphonies, where he creates this grand scope of things, the Sonic Cathedral, as it is.
Funny, I associate Bruckner more with At the Gates, but I think, Nick, were you referring to any art? Like, we're talking about classical music right now, or
any art,
a cliche, but perhaps Lord of the Rings. You can see a lot of that imagery in the cover art, even, of course.
Yeah, that is Minas Morgul, the cover art.
Yeah,
literally.
Yeah.
It is.
The cover art of the album is Minas Morgul from Lord of the Rings.
Interesting note. That's Necrolord, and he was in the previous video you discussed At the Gates. He was in Grotesque, the At the Gates band.
And he's also in Emperor.
No, he did the cover art.
Cover art.
Ah,
Yeah,
okay.
Necrolord.
Right.
He
But
did Dark Funeral, Sacramentum, plenty of others. Probably the first Dissection, first and second, I think. Could just be the first. His style is very recognizable. He uses a lot of dark blues.
you know what this reminds me of as well, I think, which may have been a huge influence on them, because this reminds me a lot of the kind of late 80s, early 90s RPGs, the on computers. The kind of,
And the
a lot of
and
dark
D&D.
fantasy. Yes,
D&D, yeah.
yeah, exactly. All that kind of image and scene, and like this is what happens when you
And
kind of remove the bards, the drunkenness, the damsels, the kind of happy fantasy stuff, and you really fixate on the darkness that a lot of these
Even
works evoke.
the mystical and fantastical side of it,
Yeah,
sort
yeah,
of
do you
majestic
remember?
side.
Uh, yeah, and a lot of people make fun of black metal or anything because it has these references, or because the people who played them. Some people make fun of Parker Kernes because of it, but the thing is that the writers of really good RPGs, they're basing their stuff on actual mythology and in actual magical traditions. Like they're really doing research into that stuff and
Yeah.
finding the symbols and everything. But when the Christian people got up in arms, do you remember they made a mess because they were accusing RPGs and D&D of being satanic and everything? They
Oh,
weren't
yeah.
wrong. They weren't wrong.
Not
Actually.
necessarily.
They weren't wrong.
You can't
But
call them right, but at the same time,
yeah,
there are elements.
yeah.
You know what? You know what just comes to mind, which is it's not the greatest movie ever, but it's got some fantastic visuals. And Francis Coppola's 1992 Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Yes.
That's what it comes to your mind when you think
Yeah,
about this.
a lot of stuff is very similar, and even the kind of the use of the sounds of some of the keys are very reminiscent of that kind of like romantic horror film.
That's the best Dracula film, I think.
Yeah.
As a whole.
So I think even a lot of the soundscapes are very similar to a lot of the kind of subdued music that you get in certain parts of the film. So I definitely think that there was an influence, and then obviously at that time the band started to dress up as vampires. They had the black sunglasses indoors and everything. So I wouldn't be surprised if this film was a huge influence on what they were trying to build there.
If you see some of their promo pictures, it's almost a reference. If you've seen this picture of Faust, he has the upside down cross. He's draped over this table, and he's wearing a cape, I believe. It's quite funny, but it does kind of remind me of a stereotypical vampire schlock. It's this blackened figure draped over something with a cape.
Yeah, I definitely do think that the kind of the more refined side of the sad lonely vampire, Vlad Tepes, mourning the loss of his human wife, was
Yes.
very influential, and it's what makes it very different to like Dark Throne's interpretation of vampires as being kind of a intense, human eating creatures, and obviously
What was the line? I've traveled oceans of time to find you. That's
yeah.
what Dracula says to this woman.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so it's ultra romantic, rather. Wait, what was that? What's that furry?
That's my
tail?
cat's my cat's tail. Do you want to see this fluffy creature?
Is it a girl?
Yeah.
Is it a girl?
Yeah, an old girl.
Yeah. You said the contrast of the romantic side, which is in the Nightside Eclipse, right, versus the Transylvanian Hunger. What do you make of that?
Well, I think here they really do take kind of a Bram's Stoker's version where Dracula is deeply in love with what's his name, Jonathan Harper's wife, and he kidnaps her and all that, and even the Nosferatu film, the 1922-23 one, where he's kind of like looking at her obsessively. There's that it's a very Beauty and the Beast thing. I think that's where it comes from. The kind of the idea of the young beautiful woman and the old disgusting beast that strikes fear, into the hearts of man. And I think Emperor really do play a lot with that imagery. I think it becomes a lot more apparent on
Aesthetic
anthems to the Welkin at dusk.
Because that's where they really let their ego go crazy, is anthems.
Yeah, where they play with
But yeah,
that a lot.
the way the
more.
characters look, Ishin and Samath, it's vampiric in a way, but of course the album is a lot more esoteric in its aims, and that's where anthems really went wrong. Anthems had a lot more self-referential tracks on it.
Yeah, honestly, I think this is what makes the album, a classic, because it is able to kind of combine these somewhat pop cultural tropes, that these things that are very ingrained within modern consciousness, but it does so in a kind of mystical and almost gnostic way, which leaves a lot of room for interpretation, a lot of room for reflection, for meditation, without being kind of like, it's very dramatic, but without having, it shows. It's, show, don't tell. It doesn't say, look, I'm being dramatic here. Oh, listen, it's just, you get that from the music and from your own kind of experience by listening to that album.
Whole other episode just on the lyrics, because we didn't. But yeah, let's focus on what we're doing right now. But yeah, wow, I'm looking
we
at
could
them
do
right
whole
now,
episodes on each individual.
And it's as you said, it's with the whole album, you say it's show, not tell, and it's true. And the lyrics particularly, it's image after image after image, each line. As a stone of scorching enthusiasm, I refract the reflecting surface of this unfathomable sea. Growing circles of grief and pain slides across the land as an omen of the horror yet to come. Each line is a new shape that you can see.
And they fit with the riffs as well, because seemingly each riff changes the landscape.
Let's recap everything that we've said. So, initially we had a band that was very influenced in 1992 by its predecessors, that kind of between first and the second wave of black metal, a lot of heavy metal stuff, even some kind of hard rockisms. We see a huge evolution in the next 2 years, the addition of Ishan into the band, and then this the absolute revelation that this album is. So anyone want to say, about how the kind of band evolved and the background?
Well, in 92, when Wrath of the Tyrant was released, you had the first two Dark Throne. You had the first Dark Throne album, the first Burzum album, the first Immortal album was already released. So they were kind of going along those guidelines of what those three bands had already done. And that's how Wrath of the Tyrant came about. And they'd only started to find their own sound. They started experimenting with keyboards, which you can hear on their follow-up 93 EP, the Emperor EP.
Yeah. So yeah, that's, and then eventually it became the album once they managed to kind of drift away from what the kind of the big three Burzum, Immortal, Dark Throne were doing back then.
And the keyboards allowed them to expand their sound and create a more complex sound, whereas in Burzum, it's more of the keyboards would accentuate one part only, and and Immortal, they use them very seldomly. Darkthrone, not at all.
All right, so let's move on to composition.
Even when they're just using simple chords, like in the first song, they actually highlight different parts of that. The main melody that starts off that song, it's an four arpeggiated power chords strung together, and the keyboards eventually come in and accentuate different parts of the harmony. But as the song progresses, the keyboards will accentuate different parts of that arpeggiation. So a different note in the chord will be highlighted at the beginning of the song as compared to the end.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. It's the fact that the keyboard, only highlights certain parts of the riffs that kind of like change the way that we perceive those riffs.
In this song, for example, it changes. So even with power chords, they were trying different harmonies. And it's a very simple observation.
Yeah.
It shows how much attention to detail they did when it came to the actual compositions.
Definitely. And Jack, you were saying about the kind of the key changes within the riffs themselves.
So yeah, there's a lot of key changes like throughout this album. Some of them like change phrase to phrase. Some of them are within phrases themselves. Like on the surface, it seems like relatively simple. Like you'll have like your 1 to 5 or 1 to 4, but they do a lot of these like within the phrases themselves. And instead of just like seeming like baby's first chord progression sort of song, it's more of like a flurry of like changes and colors, and it paints a vast sort of like soundscape with them. And not only that, but they're able to use chromaticism to their benefit as well. Instead of just like diatonically following these like 1 5 1 4 sort of progressions, they'll sometimes add these breakdowns where it's just these very simple like chromatic notes that go like up and down, creating this tension which breaks up your stereotypical like symphonic vibe of it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, David, I know you had a lot to say about how the songs were arranged, how like the band used a lot of the same ideas, and there was a lot of A-B structures.
I think they use the concept of rondo a lot. They switch between two riffs, and then they transition to a next section, and they do that with the other two riffs. And very often the song itself will do A variation of A, right?
Yeah.
So it happens what you said there. They have a recapitulation section at the end, right? So I would say that's the general tendency.
Yes, definitely. I mean, what does this album, what do all these riffs, all these parts evoke? What does it create?
Surprising that they get so much majesty out of such a simple compositional method. I think a lot of this is the layers of the album. This is how they are allowed to do this.
Yeah, the power comes from the clarity. I think the strength and the clarity of the riff and the theme of each song. Probably.
Yeah, they get a lot of juice. They get a lot of juice out of like these simple ideas. As I was mentioned before, how they like as you're talking about I'm the Black Wizards, the outro riff is the same as the intro. They just like change it up a bit by slowing it down, making it more clean. There's some more washy chords in the back. And they do that sort of thing a lot where they have like they start with a sort of like quick version of like of a section, but then they like transition it to like a slower part which reflects a similar melody or chord progression, but it completely changes the vibe because of like how it's played and the sort of embellishments that they add.
In I'm the Black Wizards, when that main melody comes back again, they actually have a synth melody going along behind it, which wasn't in the original melody, and it actually adds a counterpoint to it. I think Prozac talks about this, where through the course of a song, a riff will repeat, but it'll be changed by what came before it. I forget exactly what he calls it, but that happens in a lot of black and death metal.
Yeah, among like the AB sections that like David was talking about, usually it's the AB section happens between riffs, where it's like the riffs will remain the same among the AB sections, but the synths, they'll be like sort of like blossoming and developing throughout it. which transitions to like, you know, when the synth reaches climax, that's when it goes back to like the next section. So the
That's really what
synths,
separates this album from the rest of the Norwegian black metal classics, is that synth is allowed room to breathe, and it adds a whole different compositional element to the entire thing. I think that's what makes this stand out in that way from the rest of those albums.
Despite the synth being insanely simple for the most part, like that's
Yeah.
the true genius. You know, it's like, because this album, you know, from a guitarist perspective, it's kind of tricky because there's so much movement, so much going on, but
Yeah.
conceptually, it's not a difficult album at all. It's that, like, that's the beauty of black metal, is breaking things down to their purest forms.
yeah, what's that one part of the song that has like the synth going bow down down down
Towards the Pantheon, I believe.
Keys.
Yeah, Cosmic Keys, yes.
ABD.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
ABC.
that's literally them just going
Yeah.
up. That's
Yeah.
literally them just going
Mhm.
up like the chord progression, like 1, 2,
And
3.
it works.
Yeah.
It works
It
because
Works very well.
the guitar chords, they play the same thing. It's just 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But the synths, they play 1, 2, 3, 3, 4,
Oh,
5, which stacks
you know,
stacks it as like a sort
That's
of
the
third,
standout moment of the album.
second part around.
you know what we missed in this episode, and
What?
we talked about it a few days ago while preparing or chatting about this. The drums, the
Yes.
freaking drums. They are some of the best drums ever in black metal.
The cymbals are very subtle how they move,
I mean,
how they
a lot of what's tasteful about this album, like, all of it is tasteful, but I mean the drums are what make it. Yeah,
they're almost punctuation marks.
You know,
How he uses cymbal work.
that'll be for an article on the Hessian Firm website. So let's go. Worldview, world creation, and the aura. Tell us. David, we'll let you start off.
I think the names of the songs and the name of the album, it already gives you the whole key. In the Nightside Eclipse, first of all, Nightside, it's obviously, and when you go into the lyrics, it's all about nighttime happenings. It's about stars and about distant places and demons from the cosmos.
And you see all this in the cover art too.
Yes.
You see
It
in
all
the
exists in the
art
cover art.
as well. But then they also have all this twist, like having that thing eclipse. What is a night side eclipse? And I don't think it's talking about a lunar eclipse. That would be a dumb explanation. So
it has a more mythic explanation.
As you guys said, yeah, mythic
Or
explanation.
mystic,
It's
even.
Yeah, it's a dream. It's an evil dream kind of thing. But in the mystic way. I'm not saying in like a playful little boys game.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
But, you know, I think, you know, like any mystic tradition, you know, once you start looking at things rationally, you know, everything falls apart and you can't make sense of it all. You know, every single mystic writer, you know, crucifixion.
Right. And that's usually because people who stick to mysticism and everything, they lose track of the limits of what mysticism should be for. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
I'm saying mysticism isn't useless, but it isn't everything. Just as rationality should not be used to judge everything else, right?
Yeah.
And black metal is a great example of that.
Definitely. So, you know, any pieces of art that you'd compare this to?
Mentioned Dracula.
Yes, Bram Stoker's Dracula, 1992, the Francis Coppola film. Very dark. The kind of juxtaposition between the scary monster that scares everyone, but also at the same time a romantic beast who's in the search for love. That Lord of the Rings, obviously, where a lot of the kind of where the cover art is from, Minas Morgul, and maybe just in general a lot of kind of a dark fantasy, some RPGs, video games, and a lot of the stuff from that era.
Yeah, to round up this parade of images you just mentioned. If you notice the lyrics, the person writing the lyrics is always an observer.
Yep.
He's not saying I am doing, I go, which you see a lot of that in Immortal, for instance. He's like a warrior in a weird world, world of ice or something. But in here, the observer is only contemplating all of these things happening, but he's not. He's there because he's watching, but he's not part of the action.
Yeah.
So it's even more mystical because of that.
It kind of reflects the album cover where it's just like, that guy, or is that a guy? I always saw that. No, I don't even think that's a guy.
There's orcs on the album cover.
You'll
see orcs there on the left side.
Okay. I don't know if I'm just like my vision is like stupid, but I always see there's like a little thing in the front of the word Nightside. I always saw that as like some guy in like a cloak.
A figure.
Maybe my vision is mistaken.
I think we forgot something kind of important here. This is the last time that Ishan would not go on about Nietzsche in every single fucking thing he's ever done after. Like, if you look at anything, the Equilibrium album, the Anthems to the Welcome at Dusk, his solo stuff, it's so referential to Nietzsche. And here which is a very hard kind of topic to do, which a lot of metal bands have done, and I think for the most part they failed because it's pretty complex philosophy and it's very hard to kind of already put it into art, let alone metal. But I think here that's the beauty of it, is that you can see this as being whatever you want. You have the idea of like one person can actually be the emanation of all the black wizards, some of the black wizards. I don't know how many black wizards there are. That
52.
Witnessing the cosmic keys of creation and all that, and it's just that kind of meditative and dramatic, but it shows show don't tell.